There's a paradox that Daniel Goleman discovered while studying emotionally intelligent people across decades of research. A paradox that contradicts everything our hyper-connected culture teaches us about authenticity and openness. The individuals with the highest emotional intelligence, the ones who navigate relationships with grace and maintain inner peace regardless of external chaos, are not the ones who share everything. They are the ones who have mastered something far more subtle and powerful, the wisdom of protective silence. We live in an era that celebrates radical transparency, that equates sharing every thought and feeling with courage, that mistakes exposure for vulnerability. Social media has trained us to broadcast our lives, our struggles, our victories, believing that visibility equals validation. But what Goleman's research reveals is both liberating and uncomfortable. There are truths about ourselves that lose their power when spoken too soon, that become weapons in the wrong hands, and that need the darkness of our inner world to transform into wisdom before they can safely see light. This is not about becoming closed or distrustful. This is about recognizing that emotional sovereignty, that deep self-possession that Goleman identifies as the hallmark of mature emotional intelligence, requires boundaries, not walls built from fear, but conscious choices built from self-respect. Because the most authentic version of ourselves is not the one that tells everything, but the one that knows what deserves protection. When we examine the lives of people who maintain remarkable emotional equilibrium, who seem unshakable in their sense of self, we discover something unexpected. They guard certain truths the way a gardener protects seeds in winter, understanding that some things grow stronger in silence, that some transformations happen only when shielded from premature judgment. This protective instinct is not paranoia. It is emotional intelligence in its most refined form. The pain of oversharing is something most of us have experienced. That moment when we reveal something deeply personal, seeking understanding or connection, only to watch it become distorted in translation, used against us in an argument, or shared with others who had no right to that knowledge. That sinking feeling in the stomach, that recognition that we handed someone a piece of our soul and they did not know how to hold it carefully. Goleman calls this the violation of emotional boundaries, and it leaves invisible wounds that make us either shut down completely or, paradoxically, overshare even more desperately, seeking validation we will never find externally. What makes this dynamic so painful is that we are often unaware we are doing it. The impulse to share, to be seen, to be understood runs deep in human nature. We are social creatures wired for connection, and vulnerability can be a bridge to intimacy. But vulnerability without discernment becomes exposure, and exposure without trust becomes trauma. The difference between the two is not always clear in the moment, especially when loneliness speaks louder than wisdom, when the need for validation drowns out the quiet voice of self-protection. There are 7 fundamental truths about ourselves that emotionally intelligent people learn to protect, not because these truths are shameful, but because they are sacred. They are the seeds of our becoming, the raw material of our transformation, and they need time, space, and internal processing before they can be safely shared. When we speak them too soon, to the wrong people, or for the wrong reasons, we give away our power. Not because others intentionally harm us, though sometimes they do, but because certain truths about who we are can only be understood by those who have done their own deep inner work. The first truth that wise people learn to guard is their dreams and aspirations before they have taken root. Goleman's research on motivation reveals something counterintuitive. When we announce our goals before we have begun working toward them, the brain experiences a false sense of accomplishment. The dopamine hit of social approval for the idea tricks our neurological system into believing we have already made progress, and the actual drive to pursue the goal weakens. This is not just about jinxing our dreams. This is neuroscience. The premature sharing of what we intend to become dilutes the energy required to actually become it. Beyond the neurological hijacking, there is something more subtle at play. When we share our emerging dreams with others, we expose them to projections, doubts, and limitations that exist in those other minds, but not necessarily in ours. Someone who could never imagine themselves achieving what you are planning will unconsciously communicate that impossibility, and if you are not yet firmly rooted in your vision, their doubt can become yours. Not because they are malicious, but because human consciousness is contagious, and uncertainty spreads faster than confidence. People who have mastered emotional intelligence understand this dynamic intimately. They work in silence. They nurture their visions privately. They build momentum before seeking feedback. And when they do share, they share selectively with those who have demonstrated the capacity to hold space for another's growth without projecting their own fears onto it. This discernment is not secrecy. It is strategic self-protection, and it is one of the most powerful applications of emotional self-regulation that Goleman identifies. The second truth that deserves protection is our vulnerabilities before we have integrated them into strength. There is a profound difference between sharing a wound because it has been processed and sharing it because it is still bleeding. When we speak from unprocessed pain, seeking understanding or sympathy, we often create dynamics that reinforce the wound rather than heal it. The person listening either becomes uncomfortable and distances themselves, offers platitudes that feel hollow, or worse, stores that information as a map to our weak points. Goleman's work on emotional self-awareness emphasizes that healing is an internal process first. Before we can articulate our pain in a way that invites genuine connection, we must first witness it ourselves, sit with it, understand its roots and its patterns. This does not mean suffering in silence forever. It means giving ourselves the gift of time and space to transform raw pain into integrated wisdom. Only then can we share from a place of strength rather than from a place of seeking rescue. The third truth that emotionally intelligent people protect is their financial reality, whether it reflects abundance or scarcity. Money carries such enormous psychological and emotional weight in human society that revealing details about our financial situation almost always creates distortion in relationships. When we share that we are struggling, we often receive pity disguised as concern, a subtle shift in the power dynamic that places us in a position of perceived weakness. When we share that we are thriving, we frequently encounter envy disguised as congratulations, a poison that corrodes connection from within. What Goleman's research on social skills reveals is that authentic relationships are built on emotional resonance, not on transactional transparency. People do not need to know the details of our bank accounts to know our character. In fact, the obsession with financial disclosure often masks deeper insecurities about worth and value. Those who are truly secure in their relationship with money, whether they have much or little, do not feel compelled to discuss it because they have untangled their self-worth from their net worth. The fourth truth that deserves careful protection is the private struggles within our intimate relationships. When we share the conflicts, disappointments, or frustrations we experience with a partner or family member to friends or extended family, we create a narrative that outlives the conflict itself. The people we confide in do not witness the resolution, the apology, the reconnection. They hold in their minds the version of our loved one that we painted in a moment of anger or hurt, and that image becomes a filter through which they view that person forever. This dynamic violates what Goleman identifies as a core principle of emotional intelligence in relationships, the ability to maintain boundaries that protect the sanctity of intimate bonds. Every relationship has moments of discord, misunderstanding, or pain. These moments are not the full story, they're chapters in an ongoing narrative. When we extract these chapters and share them with an audience that does not have access to the complete arc, we betray not just our partner, but the relationship itself. People with high emotional intelligence understand that venting may provide temporary relief, but it comes at a cost. The cost is the subtle erosion of trust, even if our partner never knows we spoke about them. We know. And that knowledge changes how we hold the relationship, introduces a sliver of performance, a sense that the intimacy is no longer fully private. The most profound connections are those that are protected by mutual agreement that what happens between two people stays between two people, unless both consent to bring it into wider view. Before we continue, take a moment to tell us in the comments what city you are watching this from. The fifth truth that wise people guard is their past traumas before they have been fully metabolized into wisdom. There is a stage in healing where the wound is still raw, where speaking about it does not bring liberation, but reopens the injury. Goleman's research on emotional processing reveals that trauma needs to move through specific neurological pathways before it can be safely verbalized without retriggering the original pain. This is why therapy works in contained, boundaried spaces with trained professionals, rather than in casual conversations with friends who care, but lack the skills to hold that level of intensity. When we share our deepest wounds prematurely, we often do so seeking validation that what happened was real, that the pain was justified, that we are not crazy for still carrying it. But seeking that validation externally before we have offered it to ourselves internally creates a dangerous dependency. We begin to need others to confirm our reality, and when they cannot or will not, we feel abandoned all over again. The healing that Goleman describes as central to emotional maturity is learning to become our own witness, our own validator, our own compassionate presence. This does not mean we heal alone. It means we heal first internally with perhaps the support of a skilled therapist or guide, and only when the wound has been cleaned and stitched do we share the scar with those who have earned the right to see it. A scar is different from an open wound. A scar can be touched without causing pain. It becomes part of our story without controlling our story. And when we share from that place of integration, we offer not a plea for sympathy, but an offering of wisdom, a map for others who may be walking similar terrain. The sixth truth that emotionally intelligent people protect is their deepest insecurities and self-doubts before they have transformed them through self-awareness. We all carry within us a critical voice, that internalized judge that points out our flaws, our failures, our inadequacies. Goleman identifies this inner critic as often the most significant barrier to emotional growth, and one of the skills of emotional intelligence is learning to observe this voice without being controlled by it. But when we externalize these doubts, when we speak them aloud to others, we often solidify them, give them weight and reality they did not have when they were just thoughts. The dynamic is subtle, but powerful. When we say to someone, "I am not good enough," or "I always fail at this," or "I don't deserve success," we are not just sharing a feeling, we are making a declaration. And declarations have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. The person listening, even if they try to counter our statement with reassurance, has now received that information. It colors how they see us. And more importantly, hearing ourselves speak our deepest fears gives those fears a voice they can use to speak even louder in our minds. The alternative that Goleman suggests through his work on self-regulation is to catch these thoughts internally, examine them with curiosity rather than belief, and gradually replace them with more accurate, compassionate narratives before ever speaking them aloud. This internal dialogue work is the real transformation. By the time we are ready to share our journey with self-doubt, we are sharing it from the other side, from a place of having questioned and dismantled those beliefs, rather than from a place of still being imprisoned by them. The seventh and perhaps most profound truth that deserves protection is the exact nature of our spiritual or philosophical journey, especially while it is in flux. When we are in the process of questioning beliefs we once held, exploring new perspectives, or undergoing a fundamental shift in how we understand reality, we are in a profoundly vulnerable state. These transitions are sacred, delicate, and easily disrupted by external judgment or pressure. Goleman's work on personal growth emphasizes that transformation requires a safe container, and often that container is our own inner world. The impulse to share our evolving beliefs often comes from a need for validation, a seeking of permission to think differently than we once did. But what happens when we share our half-formed thoughts, our emerging questions, our tentative new perspectives, is that others often try to pull us back to who we were or push us toward what they think we should become. Very few people have the emotional maturity to simply hold space for another's evolution without trying to control its direction. Those who have mastered emotional intelligence learn to befriend uncertainty, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to allow their worldview to shift and reshape without needing to announce each phase of the journey. They understand that beliefs are not meant to be permanent structures, but living, breathing aspects of our consciousness that evolve as we evolve. And they protect this evolution the way a mother protects a child learning to walk, allowing falls in private before demonstrating the skill in public. What unites all 7 of these truths is a common thread. They are aspects of ourselves that are still in formation, still vulnerable, still integrating. And what Goleman's research consistently reveals is that emotional intelligence is fundamentally about timing. It is about knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to open and when to protect, when to seek connection and when to honor solitude. This timing cannot be taught through rules. It must be developed through practice, through mistakes, through the gradual refinement of inner knowing. The question that emerges then is not whether we should share these truths ever, but rather how we develop the discernment to know when the time is right. Goleman offers several guideposts. First, we must ask ourselves why we feel the impulse to share. Is it coming from a place of fullness or emptiness? Are we sharing because the insight or experience has become wisdom we genuinely want to offer? Or are we sharing because we are seeking something we have not yet given ourselves? Validation, approval, rescue, permission? Second, we must assess the capacity of our audience. Not everyone has earned the right to our inner world. This is not about them being bad people. It is about recognizing that intimacy is built in layers, through demonstrated trustworthiness over time. Someone who cannot hold their own emotions with maturity will not be able to hold ours. Someone who has not done their own inner work will project their unresolved issues onto our story. The question is not whether they care about us, but whether they have the emotional bandwidth and skill to receive what we are offering without distorting it. Third, we must feel into our own sense of groundedness around the truth we are considering sharing. If speaking it would make us dependent on the listener's reaction to feel okay about it, we are not ready. If we can share it and then release it, knowing that however it is received does not change the truth of our experience, then we have reached a level of integration that makes sharing safe. This is what Goleman means by emotional independence, the ability to know ourselves so thoroughly that external validation, while nice, is not necessary for our internal equilibrium. Share this with someone who needs to hear these words today. The transformation that occurs when we embrace protective silence is profound and multi-layered. At first, it may feel lonely. We have been conditioned to believe that sharing is connecting, that revealing is relating, that openness is intimacy. So when we begin to hold certain truths closer, to create more spaciousness between our inner experience and our outer expression, it can feel like we are isolating ourselves. But what Goleman's research and the lived experience of emotionally mature people reveals is that this initial discomfort gives way to something far more valuable, a deep, unshakable sense of self-possession. When we are no longer dependent on external validation for our internal truths, something shifts in our presence. We become less reactive, less defensive, less anxious about how we are perceived. This is because we are no longer outsourcing the knowing of ourselves to others. We have taken full ownership of our inner landscape, and that ownership radiates outward as a kind of quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself. People feel it, even if they cannot name it. This self-possession also transforms the quality of our relationships. When we stop oversharing from places of neediness or seeking, we create space for others to meet us as equals rather than as rescuers or therapists. The connections that form from this place of emotional wholeness are fundamentally different from those built on mutual wound bonding or codependent caretaking. They are relationships between two people who have done their own inner work and choose to share the fruits of that work rather than demanding that the other person do the work for them. Goleman identifies this as one of the markers of emotional maturity, the ability to be in relationship without losing oneself, to be intimate without merging, to be vulnerable without collapsing. And the foundation of this capacity is precisely what we have been exploring, the wisdom to know what to share, when to share it, and with whom. This discernment is not a closing off. It is a refinement of our capacity for authentic connection. Another dimension of transformation that emerges from protective silence is the strengthening of our internal world. When we stop immediately verbalizing every thought, feeling, question, or doubt, we create space for these inner movements to develop more fully. It is like the difference between a seed that is pulled out of the soil every day to check if it is growing versus one that is left undisturbed to put down roots in the darkness. Our inner life needs that darkness, that privacy, that freedom from scrutiny to deepen and mature. The practice of sitting with our experiences before speaking them, of allowing feelings to move through us without immediately broadcasting them, of holding questions without rushing to answers, builds what Goleman calls emotional resilience. We develop the capacity to be with ourselves, to tolerate discomfort without seeking immediate relief through expression or action. This tolerance for emotional ambiguity is one of the most valuable skills we can cultivate because life is inherently ambiguous, and those who can sit with that ambiguity without collapsing into reactivity or numbness navigate existence with far more grace. There is also a practical dimension to this transformation. When we share less indiscriminately, we give less ammunition to those who might wish us harm. Not everyone we encounter has our best interests at heart, and even those who do are human and flawed, and capable of betraying confidence in moments of their own weakness. By protecting the most vulnerable parts of ourselves, by sharing only what has been integrated and only with those who have demonstrated trustworthiness, we reduce our exposure to unnecessary pain. This is not cynicism. It is realism grounded in emotional intelligence. Goleman's work does not paint a naive picture of human relationships as always safe or always supportive. Instead, it offers tools for navigating the reality that we live among other imperfect beings who are doing their best, but who will sometimes fail us. The question is not whether to trust no one or everyone, but how to develop the discernment to trust wisely, to open gradually, to test the soil before planting our most precious seeds. What emerges from this practice of protective silence is not isolation, but sovereignty. We become the authors of our own narrative rather than allowing others to write our story through their interpretations of our premature disclosures. We maintain control over our identity, our journey, our transformation. And, paradoxically, this control makes us less controlling in our relationships, because we are not desperately seeking from others what we have learned to give ourselves. The people in our lives begin to experience us differently. There is a shift from us being someone who needs constant reassurance, validation, or fixing to someone who has clearly done deep inner work and brings that wholeness to every interaction. This does not mean we become perfect or never struggle. It means we struggle with awareness. We process internally first, and we bring to our connections the reflections rather than the raw chaos. This maturity invites maturity in others and gradually shifts the entire ecosystem of our relationships toward greater health. Goleman emphasizes throughout his work that emotional intelligence is not innate, but developed, not a destination, but a practice. The wisdom of protective silence is part of that practice. Each time we feel the impulse to share something vulnerable and pause to check in with our motivation, we are exercising emotional intelligence. Each time we choose to process internally before externalizing, we are building neural pathways of self-regulation. Each time we share from fullness rather than emptiness, we are reinforcing patterns of healthy relating. This practice is not about becoming a closed book or a stoic fortress. It is about becoming discriminating, about honoring the sacredness of our inner world, about recognizing that not everything that is true needs to be shared, and not everyone who asks deserves access. The most authentic version of ourselves is not the one that performs complete transparency, but the one that knows the difference between privacy and secrecy, between healthy boundaries and defensive walls, between vulnerability and exposure. As we return to where we began, the paradox that Daniel Goleman discovered becomes clear in a new way. The people with the highest emotional intelligence are not those who share everything. They are those who have mastered the art of conscious sharing. They understand that certain truths about ourselves are like seeds that need the darkness of our inner soil to germinate before they can safely face the light of external scrutiny. They recognize that protection is not the same as hiding, that boundaries are not the same as barriers, that privacy is not the same as secrecy. The 7 truths we have explored, our emerging dreams, our unprocessed wounds, our financial reality, our relationship struggles, our raw traumas, our deepest insecurities, and our evolving beliefs are not meant to be locked away forever. They are meant to be held gently, worked with internally, transformed through conscious awareness, and only then, when they have become integrated wisdom rather than raw vulnerability, offered to those few who have demonstrated the capacity to receive them with respect. This path of protective silence is not a retreat from connection, but a deepening into authentic intimacy. When we stop performing transparency and start practicing discernment, our relationships become more real, more reciprocal, more sustainable. We stop exhausting ourselves through emotional exhibitionism and start nourishing ourselves through careful cultivation of our inner garden. And from that nourished place, what we do choose to share has greater depth, greater power, greater capacity to truly connect and transform. What Goleman teaches us through his life's work is that emotional intelligence is fundamentally about choice. We cannot control what others do, how they react, what they project onto us, but we can control what we reveal, when we reveal it, and to whom. This choice is our power. It is the foundation of emotional sovereignty. And when we exercise it wisely, we discover something that no amount of oversharing ever provided: the peace of knowing ourselves so completely that external validation, while welcome, is no longer necessary for our inner equilibrium. The invitation is not to close your heart, but to guard it wisely, not to stop sharing, but to share consciously, not to become distrustful, but to become discerning, because the truths that matter most about who we are deserve to be protected until they have transformed from vulnerabilities into strengths, from questions into understandings, from wounds into wisdom. And when we honor that process, when we give ourselves the gift of time and space and privacy to fully integrate our experiences before broadcasting them, we become not less authentic, but more whole. In that wholeness, in that self-possessed serenity, we discover the deepest form of freedom, the freedom to be fully ourselves without needing anyone else to understand, approve, or validate that selfhood. We become our own sanctuary, our own witness, our own source of compassionate acceptance. And from that foundation, everything else, every relationship, every creation, every contribution to the world, flows with a clarity and power that can only come from one who has learned the sacred art of protective silence.